I still can't fully explain how one stupid night turned into the kind of memory that sticks with you like a scar you never asked for. The thing is, neither of us ever talk about it. We made a pact. No mentions, no jokes, no awkward glances, like it never happened. But here I am, years later, trying to figure out how something so quietly explosive could change everything between me and Jake. Jake and I met in that painfully awkward way two strangers do when they're stuck side by side at a dive bar during happy hour. I was nursing a drink I didn't really want, trying to drown the boredom that comes with living in a city where everyone's too busy to notice each other. Jake just slid into the seat next to me, like he'd been waiting for an opening in the conversation, or maybe waiting for me. I remember he had this sideways smile, like he already knew something I didn't. We started talking, and it was easy, like we'd known each other 100 years ago and we're finally catching up. The kind of easy that makes you forget you're just two random guys at a bar on a Tuesday. We laughed about the stupidest things, swapped stories about jobs we hated and the weirdos we'd dated. No pressure, no expectations, just two guys who somehow clicked. The bar was closing, but neither of us was ready to leave. It was the kind of night where you feel like the clock's on your side, the city's quiet, and the whole world isn't watching. Jake suggested we grab a late-night coffee, or maybe something stronger, and I said yes before I even thought about it. We ended up walking through the empty streets under the glow of street lamps, talking about everything and nothing. That's when the night started to bend, when the air between us shifted just enough that neither of us could ignore it anymore. We stumbled into a quiet spot, somewhere between wanting to keep talking and not really knowing what to say. And then it happened. Something small, but massive all at once. A touch that lingered a second too long. A glance that said more than words could. Neither of us said a thing about it after, and maybe that was the smartest or dumbest thing we could have done. Because when you don't talk about something that changes everything, it doesn't just disappear. It waits. It builds. The next morning, I woke up with that strange feeling, like a secret buzzing under my skin. I checked my phone, half expecting a message from Jake. Nothing. We never texted that day. Or the next. It was like we both agreed to pretend the night was just a blur, a weird glitch in the routine. But I kept replaying it in my mind, over and over. What if I'd said something? What if I'd reached out? What if Jake felt the same way I did? And more than anything, why was it so easy for us to just bury it and move on? I guess some moments aren't meant to be talked about. Some moments are just there, quietly reshaping things beneath the surface. And now, years later, I still wonder if Jake ever thinks about that night the way I do. Because some pacts aren't just about silence. They're about what you choose to carry alone. A few weeks passed after that night, and Jake and I slid back into the easy rhythm we'd found at the bar, but something had shifted. Not in the way you'd expect, a huge fight or some awkward standoff. No, it was way more subtle. We kept seeing each other, grabbing drinks or just hanging out after work, but the silence between us about that night was like a thin wall that neither of us wanted to knock down. One evening, we were sitting on the worn-out couch in his apartment, the one with the peeling paint and that ridiculous neon sign he'd gotten from some thrift store. It was late, maybe 1 a.m., and the city outside was quiet. Jake's windows faced the alleyway, so there was no street noise to break the silence. I was scrolling through my phone, pretending to be interested in whatever meme popped up, when Jake finally spoke. You ever think about that night? His voice was low, hesitant. Like he was testing the waters, seeing if I'd sink or swim. I froze. My heart stuttered in a way it hadn't before. Which night? He glanced over at me, that grin half there, half hiding something. You know, the night we agreed not to talk about. I laughed, a little too nervously. Yeah, that night. Jake stretched out, draping an arm over the back of the couch. It's been bugging me lately. Not in a bad way, just, I don't know. It feels like we skipped a chapter. I wanted to say so many things. Confess how that night felt like the first time I'd really seen him. How the way his hand brushed mine wasn't just an accident, and how I'd replayed every second in my head until it was etched into my memory. But instead, I said, maybe some chapters are better left unwritten. Jake's eyes went serious for a second, scanning mine. Maybe, but what if we're just avoiding the story because we don't know how it ends? I didn't have an answer for that. And honestly, I wasn't sure if I was ready for a story with an ending that wasn't just silence. We sat there like that for a while, neither of us pushing, just letting the unspoken fill the room. And then, out of nowhere, Jake laughed. "You always get so intense when you're uncomfortable." I rolled my eyes, but smiled. "Yeah? Well, you're the one who brought it up." He grinned, the tension melting away. "Yeah, but maybe I wanted to." That night marked the first crack in the pact, even if we weren't fully aware of it then. After that, things between us started to feel different, charged in a way that was hard to explain. We still didn't talk about that night directly, but the air was thick with the wordless questions that hovered between us. Mostly, it was in the way Jake looked at me when he thought I wasn't paying attention, or the way our hands brushed against each other when passing over a pile of records at his place. One Thursday, we ended up at the same bar where it all began. The place was almost empty, the dim lights casting long shadows across the cracked wood floor. We sat side by side at the bar, and Jake ordered 2 beers without even looking at the menu. "Remember how we met here?" I asked, swirling the amber liquid in my glass. Jake nodded, eyes fixed on the glass in front of him. "You looked like you wanted to be anywhere but here." I snorted. "Still do sometimes." For a moment, there was nothing but the hum of the bar and the clink of glasses. Then Jake leaned closer, his voice barely above a whisper. I never forgot that night. I swallowed hard, the words catching in my throat. Neither did I. He turned to face me, and for a second the playful mask dropped. Why did we make that pact anyway? Was it fear? Or just not knowing what we wanted? I shrugged, feeling the weight of years in those small movements. Maybe a little of both. Jake's gaze was steady. "I want to know what happened. I want to know you, for real." Something inside me shifted, a warmth spreading from my chest out to my fingers. "I want that too." And just like that, the pact felt less like a wall and more like a door waiting to be opened. That night, we didn't talk about the pact or the night itself. We talked about everything else, the music we loved, the places we wanted to see, the fears we kept hidden. But beneath the surface, I think we both knew we were finally starting to write the story we'd been avoiding. Still, there's a part of me that wonders how things might have been if we hadn't made that pact at all. Would it have brought us closer sooner? Or would it have burned everything down before it had the chance to breathe? I guess some secrets aren't just about silence. They're about timing. And maybe, just maybe, Jake and I were both waiting for the right moment to break ours. After that night at the bar, things started moving in a way that felt both terrifying and thrilling. We weren't officially together, if you can even call it that, because neither of us wanted to slap a label on whatever it was between us. But there was no ignoring the shift. The lingering glances, the quiet moments when we'd catch each other's hands on purpose, the way our conversations stretched longer and longer into the early morning. One Friday, Jake invited me over for dinner. He didn't say why, just that he wanted me to come by around 7. I showed up with a bottle of cheap red wine, the kind I bought when I was too nervous to pick anything fancy. His apartment smelled like fresh basil and garlic, and there was a playlist humming softly in the background, mostly old indie bands with lyrics you'd only catch if you really listened. Jake was in the kitchen tossing something in a pan. His sleeves were rolled up, arms bare, and for some reason, the sight of him like that made my heart do this ridiculous fluttering thing. I tried to act casual as I set the wine down. "You didn't have to go all fancy," I said, settling on the couch. He grinned, wiping his hands on a towel. "I didn't. Pasta and sauce from a jar, and maybe a little extra cheese, but I wanted to cook something for you." That caught me off guard. I tried to play it cool, but my voice probably came out a little too soft. "Thanks. That means a lot." We ate on the floor by the coffee table, the wine glasses clinking between bites. Jake talked about his day, the ridiculous meeting he sat through, and I told him about a project at work that was driving me crazy. It was easy, like always, but beneath it all, there was this quiet tension, something unspoken, simmering just below the surface. After dinner, we ended up back on the couch, the room dim except for the warm glow of the floor lamp. Jake's hand found mine, and I didn't pull away. Our fingers intertwined naturally, as if they'd known each other far longer than a few months. "I've been thinking about us," he said quietly. eyes locked on mine. I felt my stomach twist, that familiar mix of hope and fear. "What about us?" He shrugged, but there was a vulnerability there, raw and real. "I don't want to pretend that night never happened anymore. I want to see where this goes, even if it's scary." I wanted to say yes right then and there, but the words wouldn't come out. Instead, I nodded, squeezing his hand. "Me too." That was a turning point, even if we didn't say it outright. After that night, things got more real. We started spending almost every weekend together, exploring the city's hidden corners, trying out tiny cafes, getting lost in museums neither of us knew much about. It felt like everything was new again, like the world suddenly had color. But with the newness came the old fears. I could tell Jake was holding back sometimes, like he was waiting for the other shoe to drop. And honestly, I was terrified too. Terrified that opening that door would change everything in a way we couldn't fix. One night, maybe 2 months later, we were sitting on his fire escape, the city lights sparkling below us. Jake pulled his jacket tighter around his shoulders, and I did the same, though the chill was mostly in my nerves. "Do you ever think about why we made that pact?" he asked, voice barely louder than the breeze. I hesitated. I think we were scared. Scared of messing it up. Scared of what it could mean. Jake nodded slowly. "Yeah, but maybe we were also scared of what's real." I looked at him, really looked at him. The way his eyes caught the light, the soft curve of his smile when he thought no one was watching. "What do you mean?" He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "That night, it was more than just a moment. It was a beginning. And beginnings are messy and complicated." I swallowed, feeling my heart pounding. "So what do we do now?" He turned to me, eyes serious. "We stopped pretending like that night never happened. We stopped hiding." I wanted to believe him. I wanted to throw caution to the wind and dive in head first. But part of me still clung to the safety of silence, the comfort of not knowing exactly where this would lead. Before I could say anything, Jake leaned in, pressing a gentle kiss to my forehead. "We don't have to figure it all out tonight. Just start somewhere." That kiss was the promise I needed. Not that everything would be perfect or easy, but that we'd face it together. And maybe that was the real story all along. Not the pact we made, but the one we were about to break. After that night on the fire escape, something between us shifted in a way that was invisible, but undeniable. It wasn't like we suddenly had it all figured out, but the silence that had hung so heavily over us started to crack, letting light in. I began to realize that maybe the pact wasn't just about keeping quiet. It was about the fear of facing what we really wanted. In the weeks that followed, Jake and I fell into a strange kind of rhythm. We still didn't label anything, didn't make grand declarations, but the way we moved around each other felt different, more deliberate, more real. Like we were finally learning how to be honest even when honesty was scary. One Saturday afternoon, he texted me out of the blue. "Want to come over? I'm making breakfast, pancakes, and coffee. Lots of coffee." I didn't hesitate. When I got to his place, the smell of pancakes was already filling the air. Jake was in his usual worn hoodie, flipping pancakes with a concentration that made me smile. The kitchen was a mess. Flour dusted the counters, and a stack of dirty dishes sat in the sink, but it all felt cozy, lived in. I slid next to him at the counter, and he handed me a mug of black coffee. I figured if we're going to start being honest, we might as well do it over food. I laughed. "That sounds like a solid plan." We talked through breakfast like we were old friends catching up on a lifetime of stories. Jake told me about his family back home, the way his younger brother had been the troublemaker of the bunch, and how his mom still sent him care packages with ridiculous amounts of snacks. I shared stories about my own family, the awkward holidays, and the moments that made me question whether I was really ready to be so open with anyone. Somewhere between syrup and laughter, I found the nerve to ask, "Have you thought about telling anyone else? About us, I mean." Jake's smile faded just a bit. "Not really. I'm not sure I'm ready for that." I nodded, understanding. "Me neither, but I also don't want to hide anymore." He reached over and squeezed my hand, his eyes soft but serious. "We take it slow, at our own pace." That felt like the most honest thing anyone had ever said to me. But even with the new openness, there were moments when the past, the pact, the fear crept back in. Like this one night a few weeks later. when we were at a party Jake dragged me to. It was one of those loud, crowded places where everyone was trying too hard to be cool, and I felt completely out of place. Jake was chatting with some friends, and I was on the sidelines, nursing a drink and trying not to overthink everything. Then, out of nowhere, someone asked me if Jake and I were dating. I froze. The room seemed to close in, the music suddenly too loud. I glanced over at Jake, who was watching me with a kind of quiet encouragement. I wanted to shout it from the rooftops, to tell everyone what that night had meant, what we'd been trying to build, but the words stuck in my throat. Instead, I smiled awkwardly and said, "We're figuring things out." Jake came over and dropped his arm around my shoulders, pulling me close. Yeah, figuring things out. It wasn't a declaration, but it was something. And in that moment, I realized that the pact we made wasn't about denying what happened. It was about protecting ourselves until we were ready. After the party, we walked home together, the city lights flickering above us. I looked over at Jake, feeling a warmth I hadn't allowed myself to feel before. "Do you think we're ready?" I asked quietly. He shrugged, but his smile was confident. "Ready for what?" "To stop hiding." Jake stopped walking and turned to face me, his expression serious. "Maybe we don't have to be ready all at once. Maybe it's enough that we're honest with each other." I wanted to argue to say that honesty meant more than that. But looking into his eyes, I knew he was right. So we kept going, day by day, moment by moment, breaking the pact not with words, but with the small, real things. The handholds in public, the late-night calls, the way we started to talk about our future without fear. And even though we never said it outright, I think we both knew that night, the night we promised never to talk about, was the beginning of something neither of us could have predicted. Something messy, scary, but beautiful all the same. Because sometimes, the most important stories are the ones we're too afraid to tell. And maybe, just maybe, the best way to honor them is by living them out loud. It felt like things were finally settling into a rhythm between Jake and me. One where the silence didn't feel like a wall anymore, but more like a space we could fill together. But, of course, life doesn't let you coast for too long without stirring the pot. One night, a few weeks after the party, Jake invited me to a gallery opening downtown. Art wasn't really my thing, but with Jake, I was willing to fake enthusiasm. The place was packed, walls lined with abstract paintings and photographs that looked like they were trying too hard to be profound. I was nursing a beer, scanning the crowd, when Jake tugged me toward a quieter corner. He pulled out his phone and showed me a photo. It was that night, the night of the pact, captured by a friend's camera, completely unexpected. We were both laughing, caught mid-motion, completely unaware of the lens. The photo was beautiful and raw, but it also felt like a secret laid bare. "Where did you get this?" I asked, heart pounding. Jake shrugged, his face unreadable. "Somebody posted it online. I found it this afternoon." I stared at the image, the memory flooding back all at once. The silence, the stolen touch, the pact that had kept us both from facing what really happened. "Why didn't you tell me?" He looked away, fiddling with the edge of his jacket. "I wasn't sure how you'd react, or if we were ready for anyone else to see." I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. "I'm not upset, just surprised." Jake's eyes met mine, sincere and a little vulnerable. I guess the pact's harder to keep when the world doesn't know it exists. That night, we left the gallery early and walked through the quiet city streets, the photo heavy in the back of my mind. We didn't talk much, but the silence between us wasn't uncomfortable this time. It was full of things we were starting to understand about each other, about ourselves. Later, back at his apartment, Jake broke the quiet. "Do you think we should say something to people?" I hesitated. "I don't know. Part of me wants to keep this small, just for us." Jake nodded slowly. "Me too. But maybe it's time we stop hiding in plain sight." That idea both scared and excited me. The thought of opening up, of letting others in, felt like stepping off a cliff. But with Jake beside me, the fall didn't seem quite so terrifying. In the weeks that followed, we started telling a few close friends, carefully, cautiously. The reactions were mostly positive, which helped chip away at the fear that had kept us silent for so long. It was like coming up for air after holding it in too long. One night, after a quiet dinner at Jake's, He leaned back and sighed. I'm glad we didn't keep that pact forever. Me too, I said, reaching for his hand. It was never really about keeping secrets. It was about finding the courage to face them. Jake smiled, the kind of smile that made you feel like everything was going to be okay. So, what's next for us? I thought about it, the messy, uncertain future we were stepping into together. Whatever it is, we face it. No more pacts. No more silence. He nodded, squeezing my hand. Deal. And in that moment, I realized the pact wasn't just a secret we kept from the world. It was the start of a story, our story, that was finally ready to be told. After we made that unspoken agreement, no more pacts, no more silence, I thought maybe the hardest part was behind us. But life, as it tends to do, had other plans. It's one thing to admit something to a few close friends. It's another to let it spill out into the world where everyone can see it. A couple weeks after that conversation, Jake and I were at his place one evening, just winding down after a long day. I was scrolling through my phone when a notification popped up, a comment on a social media post from one of our friends. It was a picture from that gallery opening the same night the photo of us got leaked. The comment was harmless enough, but it mentioned us out loud in public. I looked up at Jake, feeling this sudden knot in my stomach. Hey, do you think people are gonna start talking? Like, really talking? He shrugged, leaning back on the couch. Maybe, but honestly, I don't want to hide anymore. If someone wants to talk, that's on them. I admired his confidence, but inside, I was wrestling with a mix of excitement and fear I hadn't quite felt before. Suddenly, the idea of living openly wasn't just a hope. It was a reality knocking on my door. The next day at work was a test. I caught a few sideways glances from coworkers and overheard snatches of conversation that made my skin crawl. I wasn't sure if it was curiosity or judgment, but either way, it left me feeling exposed. During lunch, my phone buzzed. A text from Jake. Lunch date after work. Need to talk. I almost ignored it, but something in the words made me pause. I replied, sure. That evening, we met at our usual spot, a quiet cafe tucked away from the bustle of the city. Jake was already there when I arrived, his expression serious but calm. What's up? I asked, sliding into the seat opposite him. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. I've been thinking a lot about what this means. Us being out, being open, it's not just about us anymore. It's about how the world sees us. I nodded slowly. Yeah, I get that. It's scary. Jake reached across the table and took my hand. I want to face it with you. But I also want us to be ready for whatever comes next. I squeezed his hand back, feeling a surge of warmth. I'm scared too, but I'm willing to try. That night we talked for hours about fears, about hopes, about the future. It was the kind of conversation that lays everything bare and somehow builds something stronger in the process. As the weeks turned into months, we found our own way through the noise and the questions. Some days were easier than others, but having Jake by my side made the uncertainty bearable. One weekend, we decided to take a trip out of the city, to escape the constant hum of expectation and just be ourselves somewhere new. We rented a small cabin by a lake, the kind of place where the only light comes from the stars and the sound of the wind in the trees. That first night, after a quiet dinner, we sat outside wrapped in blankets, the cool air crisp against our skin. I looked over at Jake, the flicker of the firelight catching his eyes. You know, I said softly, I never thought that night, the one we promised not to talk about, would lead us here. He smiled, his hand finding mine in the dark. Sometimes the things we try hardest to forget turn out to be the most important. I nodded, feeling a strange mix of gratitude and awe. I'm glad we broke the pact. Jake leaned in, his voice a whisper. Me too. And as we sat there, under a sky full of stars, I realized that the night we made that pact wasn't just a secret to bury. It was the beginning of everything, of us, of the messy, beautiful journey we were on together. No more silence, no more hiding. Just us, finally telling the story we'd been too afraid to say out loud. That trip by the lake was exactly what we needed. Away from the noise, away from the questions and the whispers, Jake and I finally got to breathe. We spent those days doing nothing extraordinary, cooking simple meals, hiking quiet trails, sitting by the water's edge, and talking about everything and nothing. But it was in those ordinary moments that I felt something extraordinary growing between us. One afternoon, we found a spot on the dock, the sun warm on our backs. Jake leaned into me, resting his head on my shoulder. I didn't say anything at first, just let the calm settle in around us. After a while, he looked up and smiled, that easy, genuine smile that had drawn me in from the start. "You know," he said, "I was scared once, scared of what that night meant, scared of losing what we had." I turned to face him, my heart honest in my chest. "Me too." But, he continued, "I'm glad we made that pact, not because it kept us silent, but because it made us realize what we didn't want to lose, us." I nodded, feeling the weight of those words sink in. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't simple, but it was real. And that was everything. I reached for his hand, intertwining our fingers. "No more pacts. Just us." He smiled again, squeezing my hand gently. "Just us." As the sun dipped lower, casting golden light over the water, I felt a quiet peace settle inside me. The kind of peace that comes from finally owning your story, from knowing that the people who mean the most are right there beside you, scars and all. That night, under a sky full of stars, we didn't need words to say everything. The pact we made years ago wasn't a chain. It was a promise to ourselves to wait until we were ready. And now, looking back, I wouldn't change a thing, because sometimes the moments you're afraid to talk about are the ones that teach you how to love, for real, messy, and beautifully imperfect. And that, I think, is what makes the story worth telling.